At the end of 20 years, we, the military, helped build an army, a state, but we could not forge a nation. The enemy occupied Kabul, the overthrow of the government occurred, and the military we supported for 2 decades faded away. That is a strategic failure.
Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, talking earlier today about the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. The beginning of our conversation now with Michael Allen, managing director and partner at Beacon Global Strategies, former special assistant to former President George W. Bush. Michael, it's great to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
The war in
so
Afghanistan
much.
started right around the time that you joined the Bush administration.
Yes.
That was a long time ago now, and Joe Biden is taking credit for bringing that war to an end. When you hear criticism like that from the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, do you frame this as an intelligence failure, a failure in planning? What should have been done differently?
I don't think it's an intelligence failure. I think most of it was a failure in planning and a failure to set expectations about what the U.S. endgame would be over time. I thought we still had a reasonable chance at the beginning of the Biden administration for us to pull out the vast majority of our troops, but leave a stay-behind force of maybe 3,000 troops in Bagram only for a counterterrorism mission. I think that would have had a salutary benefit to the Afghanistan army in that they would have at least had some reassurance that the United States was still there, and I think they maybe over time could have begun to put down roots and become a more effective fighting force. But when we all left in the middle of the night the way we did, they panicked, they ran, and the Taliban took over Kabul.
Well, and the fact of the matter is this was almost 3 years ago now. All we can look at it is from a perspective of hindsight versus looking forward. And especially with everything that has happened geopolitically in the almost 3 years since, to what extent do you think things we have seen, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, may have been informed by things we saw take place in August of 2021? And how should we approach things differently, knowing exactly what happened with this withdrawal as we think about these not just ongoing conflicts, but conflicts of the future?
I think it's a great point. I think we, the United States, sent unintentionally a signal to Vladimir Putin that we were pivoting to Asia only and we wanted to get out of every other commitment. So the Middle East, certainly, Afghanistan and South Asia as well. But I think Vladimir Putin probably made a decision that, you know what, the United States won't care so much, or at least President Biden won't send troops to Eastern Europe to try and thwart my ambitions with Ukraine. I think that turned out to be a costly failure. I think we have a lot that we'll have to do in retrospect to figure out why Vladimir Putin was not deterred. But I can tell you right now what it means for the United States, and that is if the Congress doesn't pass the $60 billion national security supplemental to help out the Ukrainian fighting force, Taiwan is going to be the one, China is going to be the one to draw another negative inference, and then Taiwan will suffer.
You say we left in the middle of the night in Afghanistan. Recalling Donald Trump made the original agreement to decamp and to leave the country. Joe Biden extended our time commitment there. What would have happened if we had left under Donald Trump's original plan?
I think you would have seen a similar disaster.
Yeah.
I think that it was a foolhardy way forward for either president to think that we could get out abruptly and completely, because I don't think they were totally witting of or considering what our considerable counterterrorism mission should have been. Now, we have not seen as much intelligence since then on al-Qaeda coming back and being able to hit as a global force. We've seen some of ISIS, but they're mostly locked in local battles in Afghanistan. But it's still something for us to watch. And over time, I think we're going to have to stare at Afghanistan through our satellites and through our drones, because remember, this is where al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden got together in the late 1990s and early 2000s.
Michael, I want to return to the subject of Ukraine funding, which you mentioned still held up in Congress. Senator Lindsey Graham went to Ukraine, met with President Zelensky, and essentially said that what he told him was that the most likely scenario Ukraine is going to get funding in from this Congress is with a no-interest waivable loan, that is the most likely path forward. Still, billions of dollars would be spent here at home in the defense industrial base, but the money Ukraine receives would be in that form. Would that work?
I think it's a great idea, and it's frankly politically the easiest path from point A to B, which is to get the Ukrainians, and not a minute sooner, something to them that they can at least fight back and stave off progress that the Russian military may be in a better position to make. So I think it's a good idea. I know Senator McConnell is not thrilled with the precedent of setting a loan to an ally, but listen, this is what we did in World War II. It was called the Lend-Lease program. President Roosevelt felt politically that he couldn't just give destroyers and things away. He had to bring the isolationists along, and the way he did it at the time was to say, hey, it's not a gift, it's a loan. If Trump needs to do that too to get the House Republicans to move on this, then by all means I'm for it. And Trump even says in a little bit in his speeches, well, they don't have to pay us back until they're able to pay us back. And that, I think, is the smart thing to do. It'll be years down the road.
Do you think it's a great idea because the legislation has been bogged down in this debate? Would you have preferred that? This is kind of the next best thing, because you refer to Donald Trump. A lot of people say, look, the next president, whomever that might be, could call in those loans.
Exactly. I would have preferred that we pass the Senate bill as is, and if I were the Speaker, I wish we could put it on the floor tonight. But if he feels like he cannot do that, or if you don't get a sufficient number of signatures through this House procedural motion called the discharge petition, which is very arcane and the rest. But if you can't get the real thing, the next best thing is the loan that they're discussing. You're exactly right. Most of the money would go for U.S. jobs, and some of the economic assistance could possibly be in the form of a loan. I think we've just got to move out so quickly because we're in dire straits, and the message that will send to the world that the United States has sort of turned its back on Ukraine is incredibly dangerous.
And of course, it's not just funding for Ukraine that is at question. It's all wrapped together in a package that includes funding also for Taiwan, which you've mentioned, and for Israel. And especially as we've had the Biden administration messaging, including in a phone call the president had with Bibi Netanyahu yesterday, the idea that they would like them to refrain from entering Rafah until there is a plan to protect civilian life, till they feel they can do that credibly. Is withholding aid so that you can influence Israeli policy and action in Gaza something that might be appropriate? What other leverage would the United States have to influence the Israeli government?
Well, I think you're on to something. I think many on the Democratic left and some of the progressives are outright suggesting that we should condition our military assistance to Rafah and to a greater path for humanitarian assistance inside of Gaza. I'm a little bit confused, though, of where President Biden is. He started so strongly of, yes, you were attacked unjustly, of course, by Hamas. He likened it to Pearl Harbor. He likened it to 9/11 in the United States. But then now we're sort of trying to tell Netanyahu how to conduct his own war.
Well, more than 30,000 Palestinians have died in the end.
I think it's appropriate for us to urge upon the Israelis that they should do more to help from a humanitarian basis. But as I understand it, the Israelis want to go in and get the last 4 battalions of the Hamas fighters, and I think we ought to give them a little bit more space to do that, to at least get the job as close to being done as possible.
All right, Michael Allen, thank you so much for joining us here in our Washington studio. We appreciate your time this evening. Now, coming up